Today, December 9th, 2025, marks the 30th anniversary of one of the most iconic Godzilla films of all time, Godzilla x Destoroyah, or Godzilla vs. Destoroyah, or Destroya, Destroyer, however you want to call it. The grand finale of the Heisei-era Godzilla series, this film stands out amongst the crowd of fantastic tokusatsu work of the era for the terrifying kaiju villain, the tear-jerking Godzilla death scene that ends it all, and for just being the end cap for a 7-film continuity. Several returning characters join the audience in giving their final farewell to Godzilla in this film, particularly Miki Saigusa, the psychic who appears in most of these films, and Emiko Yamane from the very first film way back in 1954. Akira Ifukube's Requiem for Godzilla that plays the monster off to the great nuclear beyond emphasizes the end of an era, what was supposed to be the final Toho-produced Godzilla film of the 20th century. I want to look back at this film and its legacy 30 years on, and hopefully show you what makes this film so beloved, including by yours truly. Chapter 1, Introduction. It's 1995. The Japanese asset price bubble fully popped about 3 years ago, and the economy has been in essentially a free fall ever since, in what would eventually be called the Lost Decade. TriStar Pictures has spent that same amount of time producing their new American Godzilla film. They still haven't made much progress because of constant rewrites and an impending change of directors. Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla in 1993 was supposed to be the final film for the Heisei series to make room for this new movie and to honor the recent passing of the original Godzilla director, Ishiro Honda. Unfortunately, the delays to the American production would mean a gap in Toho's most lucrative multimedia brand. To fill this gap, Toho Godzilla film production continued, and Godzilla vs. Space Godzilla was released in 1994. The problem? The economic crash and just plain fatigue from the now yearly Godzilla films meant that neither of these two films had the audience numbers of the highly successful Godzilla vs. Mothra. Additionally, Godzilla vs. Space Godzilla, supposedly the 40th anniversary film, lagged behind even further than Mechagodzilla, showing a clear downwards trend. While they definitely made their money back, even on merch alone, the lowered attendance, the inability to get an American release, and mixed reviews for the inconsistent Godzilla vs. Space Godzilla made Toho a little nervous that they had maxed out the audience for kaiju films. Even worse for them, Godzilla vs. Space Godzilla ended up going head-to-head with the first Heisei Gamera film, which released a few months later with half the budget, and Godzilla lost horribly. This proved there was in fact more audience for kaiju films, both domestically and in America, just not for Godzilla films, at least as they were currently being made. With the Lost Decade in full swing, audience waning from Godzilla fatigue, the rise of a new prestigious Gamera franchise of all things, and the new Hollywood Godzilla film surely coming soon, special effects director Koichi Kawakita demanded a last-minute rewrite on the next entry. The next film would be serious, weighty, and impressive, just like Gamera's new film. And producer Shogo Tomiyama also weighed in, deciding this would be the final entry in the Heisei saga. He grabbed Kazuki Omori, writer and director of both Godzilla vs. Biollante and Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah, as well as screenplay writer of the highest-grossing movie in the series, Godzilla vs. Mothra, to write the film. He then grabbed Takao Okawara, director of Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla and, of course, Godzilla vs. Mothra, to direct. They all joined Kawakita, special effects director for most of the Heisei era, and the four of them got to work. As the finale of the collective story of the Heisei era, Godzilla vs. Destoroyah starts off strong, with a ferocious burning Godzilla attacking Hong Kong in an absolutely fantastic scene of pure destruction. Godzilla and the world that it inhabits has been well established by this point, leaving the film a lot of room to do cool scenes like this that also present their new twist for this entry. Godzilla's heart, a living nuclear reactor in the Heisei era canon, is going critical. This is currently melting his body from the inside out, and soon threatens to break through and ignite, vaporizing the entire planet. And the pain of it all is making it pissed. This takes the updated metaphor from the first Heisei film, Godzilla 1984, to its logical endpoint. Godzilla in the Heisei era is no longer commenting on just the nuclear bomb, although the Cold War plot of 1984 certainly keeps those ideas in mind as well, but now it also is exploring Japan's uncomfortable relationship with nuclear power plants, of which they had several at the time. Godzilla vs. Destoroyah is essentially the Chernobyl in this metaphor. Godzilla is going critical and threatens not just the area it stomps through, but the whole world. And not only that, but a new energy source, born from the same weapon that originally destroyed Godzilla, also threatens the world with a new kaiju, Destoroyah. Gee, Godzilla vs. Destoroyah, how come Toho lets you have two metaphors for nuclear power? And speaking of Destoroyah, what could possibly be a better final fight for Godzilla? Taking on the living embodiment of the Oxygen Destroyer, the only weapon to kill Godzilla, as Godzilla's heart is on its last legs. A last gasp rematch. It's certainly better than their original idea of having Godzilla fight against King Kong again, or even Mechana-Kong, both of which were felled by rights issues. It's also better than their next idea of having Godzilla fight against the ghost of the original Godzilla. Thank goodness they had already done Mechagodzilla and Space Godzilla all in a row, so they realized that they shouldn't do that one either. But also, thank goodness that Omori had the idea in the first place to inspire the inclusion of the Oxygen Destroyer in the film. And just look at that design of our very literally named destroyer. Chapter 2. How to Make a Monster. Destoroyah was designed primarily by Minoru Yoshida, who was responsible for adding crustacean-like features to an earlier creature concept called Barubaroi, which was apparently scrapped for sounding too similar to Berber, like the ethnic group. Barubaroi, in a lot of ways, feels more like the next new kaiju of the franchise, Orga, including how it steals the form of an Anguirus hound, a subspecies of Anguirus that was supposed to premiere in this version of the film. Yoshida instead redirected the creature with its new name Destoroyah to be much more crustacean-esque, with a little bit of Go Nagai Devilman flair. This resulted in the juvenile, aggregate, and flying forms, while Hideo Okamoto designed the iconic perfect form to top it off. By the way, that name Destoroyah obviously derives from the name of the Oxygen Destroyer, with a little bit of spice thrown in to make it copyrightable. The ah sound does keep it in line with a ton of other kaiju though, which end in the ra, essentially the Japanese equivalent of Zilla. The suit built from the concept art follows closer to Yoshida's design, but the incredible Noriyoshi Orai depicts a perfect form that strays closer to Okamoto's design for his poster illustration. A common story since Orai worked from concept art rather than the film itself. That suit was made by Shinichi Wakasa's company Monsters Inc. No, not that one. Monsters worked on not only almost every Godzilla movie from 1993 to 2004, but also Gamera 2, the Rebirth of Mothra trilogy, several Ultraman series, and the fantastic Fest Godzilla short films. As I described earlier, the design process was a bit all over the place, and that ate into a lot of the production time. This meant that Monsters had only 40 days to complete all the giant forms, the aggregate suit, the flying model, and the perfect suit. To complete this monster of a task, they brought in 22 people to work on these suits. The juvenile form was then just produced based on the same prototype as the aggregate suit, since they look pretty similar, and was operated with a combination of wires and remote controls. There were also full animatronics made with wheels hidden underneath that mess of moving legs, and also animatronic heads to get some aliens action going on. In some distant shots, they just used the official Bandai soft vinyl figures, which, as someone who collects the soft vinyls and basically made my own mini kaiju films as I played with them as a kid, that's so fucking funny. In other instances, like the scene where Godzilla is sworn by the aggregates, compositing is used instead to make one suit look like many suits. The magic of editing. I adore every aspect of Destoroyah's design. I think it fits perfectly in the universe, as we know from both the original film and the 1984 film that Godzilla has a habit of bringing ancient crustaceans or insects along with it when it rises from the sea. It wouldn't be crazy that some got mutated by the Oxygen Destroyer, although the fact that they're specified as pre-Cambrian... Look, we don't come to Godzilla for accurate paleontology. Maybe he was just in a really deep hole. But that pre-Cambrian origin allows for them to be native to an anaerobic environment, a perfect host for the Oxygen Destroyer. Over the course of the 40 years since the death of Godzilla, they have incorporated the microoxygen from the Oxygen Destroyer into their biology, and have seemingly vastly increased their cognitive functions. Despite their basic origins and alien appearance, they seem to have developed a sort of sadistic glee with their killing spree, particularly in their attack on Junior. Perfect form becoming more demonic in appearance really emphasizes this, as well as their shrill shriek of a roar, and the snake attacks on Godzilla each time it stops to mourn Junior. Put all together, Destoroyah feels like the perfect final foe for the King of the Monsters. Unfortunately, the large bulky suit doesn't really let Ryo Hariya's performance shine through, which is basically the story of Hariya's Godzilla career, since his only other credit is as Space Godzilla, another insanely bulky suit that can't move around very well. At least Destoroyah is partly on rails to make it easier to actually move, but that certainly doesn't help with making any sort of performance come through. Still a really cool design and concept for a monster that was made from scratch in such crazy time constraints. Meanwhile, Godzilla's new burning suit was a much more simple modification of the Moge Goji suit from the previous film, Godzilla vs. Space Godzilla. To give off that critical mass glow, sections of the suit were cut out to put in about 200 small red, orange, and yellow light bulbs, which were then covered with semi-transparent vinyl plates. The eyes were also given a glow to them to match. And when all that was combined with some computer graphical enhancements, the effect is quite impactful. The suit was also equipped with various vents that allow steam to pour out, which looks absolutely incredible on film. Unfortunately, that steam was pure carbon monoxide just being pumped inside the suit. Kenpachiro Satsuma, the actor portraying Godzilla, fainted several times over the course of filming. Filming in a kaiju suit is tough enough on your body as is. Adding carbon monoxide poisoning is crazy.
The suit only had 12 very small holes to allow me to inhale air. When they used the gas, I'd inhale that and faint. I fainted 4 times during the first day of filming. I wasn't warned about the carbon monoxide, so I wasn't wearing an oxygen mask.
Really glad they eventually gave him an oxygen mask so he could actually, breathe. The real oxygen destroyer was the Godzilla suit all along. Despite that initial lack of oxygen, Satsuma is able to give a lot of emotion to his performance through that big rubber suit and all the fainting. For the water scenes, the Rado Goji suit from Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla was given similar modifications and used in place of the Moge Goji suit. Water is really destructive to kaiju suits, so it is fairly common practice for Godzilla films to use previous Godzilla suits for water scenes, even when they look nothing like the main suit of the film. Luckily, in this case, there's not a ton of difference between the two suits, and the main difference is in their animatronic capabilities, which you literally wouldn't know if you weren't told. Oopsie! The burning Godzilla suit makes the threat of Godzilla's imminent death immediately apparent, and also makes the monster significantly more intimidating. Godzilla's attack on Hong Kong is one of the most ferocious attacks we've seen from it, and the roars sound like screams of pain. The new eyes feel more emotive, both more intimidating when on a rampage, and more pained when mourning Junior. The improved animatronics from the Moge Goji suit really increase its ability to emote in these scenes as well, boosting Satsuma's great performance. I adore Burning Godzilla, it's just a perfect suit for the final film. And finally, Godzilla Jr. Junior's suit was in the works for this film from before much else of the film was decided. An early concept for the 7th Heisei film, somewhere between the Ghost Godzilla idea and Barubaroi, was even just a face-off between Godzilla Jr. and the adult Godzilla. Noriyoshi Orai's poster even includes a sneaky reference to Junior's presence with a second, smaller Godzilla, even though the concept was kept hidden from the public in the run-up to the premiere. Designed by Shinji Nishikawa, the new look intends to blend the upright posture of Godzilla with the more anatomically correct posture for a dinosaur that its youngest form and the original Godzillasaur had, partially inspired by a similar change made for the TriStar Pictures Godzilla. This only sort of translated to the actual suit, made by Tomoki Kobayashi for Toho Special Art. It remains mostly upright, but with a noticeable hunch as a nod to that earlier design. It's just so much easier for the suit actor if the suit is upright, so for practicality's sake, they had to make a compromise. Like previous incarnations of Junior, a mechanical model of the upper body was made for close-up scenes. Another animatronic was made to represent the monster in scenes where Godzilla or Perfect Form Destoroyah were on screen, since Junior is supposed to be less than half the height of Godzilla. Otherwise, Hurricane Ryu Haruken was reprising his role from Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla to portray Junior stomping ashore at Omezaki or fighting Destoroyah's aggregate and flying forms. And then in the final scene of the movie, the Junior that has ascended the throne is literally just the burning Godzilla suit with the lights turned off and a lot of fog and backlighting so you can't see them. A cheap, quick, and clever solution for that impactful finale to the series. Junior serves as the heart of this film and the entire late Heisei era. As a character that we've watched grow from an egg to a young adult, even if that growth was supercharged by radiation, there's a lot of emotion invested in Junior, both from the audience and the recurring characters. Junior really helps set the stakes of the film as well by getting absolutely annihilated by Destoroyah a few times. It really lets Destoroyah show how much of a threat they are and how ruthless they can be. Junior's sacrifice to protect Miki Saigusa from them tugs at the heart, and then, of course, the tears are drawn fully out for the mourning Godzilla, even as they are set to burn out the core of the planet with their nuclear heart. This film would not work as well as it does without Junior's presence, and the Godzilla with puppy dog eyes look that the suit has is perfect for that role. The Super X ship also returns after having been abandoned for most of the series. This version, the Super X3, was originally conceived as a new incarnation of the Gotengo from Atragon. That was eventually scrapped, and a separate ship made from the destroyed Mogera parts was tossed around for a while. Eventually they ended up back at the Super X3 with a design that is more reminiscent of the old Super X's, just with a bit more airplane in there and a bit less hovercraft. I do have to say though, they kind of have a hard time making it feel like it's flying at speed in some scenes, but at least it does look more like an airplane. The Super X3 is conveniently loaded with cold-based weaponry like cryo beams and cadmium missiles, just in time to stop Godzilla from going critical, and these lead to some extremely cool freezing effects thanks to the magic of editing, CGI, and liquid nitrogen. For this final outing, the filmmakers decided to let the Super X3 have a much more successful performance than its predecessors. While it isn't able to stop Godzilla's heart from going critical, it is able to slow down the process and change the threat from vaporizing the entire planet to melting down the core of the planet, so-called China Syndrome, to making just Tokyo an irradiated wasteland. And then, with the help of Nuclear Sponge Jr., even that last threat is neutralized. Super X3 also gets to help take down Destoroyah, and doesn't get destroyed in return. This is one of the most successful anti-kaiju weapons of all time, and it looks like a big, chunky airplane. This is my platonic ideal of the Super X. I forget what the others even look like half the time. But monsters and sci-fi weapons alone do not a movie make. There's a whole other side of the cast that can actually say human words to convey ideas and themes directly to the audience and also, create actual stakes you care about. Since they're arguably the most important part of the kaiju film, we gotta talk about the human cast. Chapter 3, Yamane's Legacy. For the human side of the plot, we see both the return of Heisei continuity mainstays, but also a familiar face from the past. Momoko Kochi reprises her role as Emiko Yamane from the original Godzilla. Emiko in this film is deeply traumatized by the events of the original Godzilla, unable to carry out Dr. Serizawa's dying wish to marry Ogata because of the haunting memories of 1954, which is a convenient dyslexic mistype away from 1945, the year the nuclear bombs were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. She cannot forget the original Godzilla attack, much like the people of her generation could not forget Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The next generation has a different view though. Dr. Yamane's grandchildren, by way of the Odo Island orphan that Yamane adopted, show us some differing looks at the bomb, Godzilla, from the newer generation. Yoko Ishino's Yukari Yamane is a reporter, a common role in Godzilla films, now updated for the modern world of the 24-hour TV news cycle. As a reporter, she has an appropriately skeptical perspective on Dr. Kensaku Ijuin's work with microoxygen, which reminds her too much of the tales her aunt told her about the oxygen destroyer. While in earlier eras of Godzilla, reporters and scientists often worked together in service of finding the truth, this film, made in an era more cynical about the corporatization of science, pits reporter and scientist against each other in a more dialectical search for the truth. The other Yamane grandchild helps emphasize this. Yasufumi Hayashi's Kenichi Yamane is still just a college student, but happens to study Godzilla as a hobby, inspired by the post-1954 career path of his father. His thesis paper, rejected by his professor and originally ignored by G-Force, accurately predicted the meltdown scenario that comes to pass in this film. And when G-Force finds his paper published online and comes to him for answers on how to stop it, he has only one.
The oxygen destroyer.
You see, Kenichi has no historical perspective on the oxygen destroyer, read nuclear bomb. That's the past, he's here in the now. Not only that, Kenichi is studying abroad in America. Kenichi as a character brings in the view of a Japanese youth much more influenced by American culture than any memory of a bomb that exploded before he was ever born. Kenichi only sees the future where Godzilla destroys the entire world, and his answer, free of any sentimentality, is to build the oxygen destroyer. Takuro Tatsumi's Dr. Ijuin, while also a scientist, is much more hesitant. While he works with microoxygen, the very substance that made Serizawa's oxygen destroyer work, he pursues only peaceful uses for it, bristling at the very idea that his research be used to recreate Serizawa's weapon. When pressed by Yukari, he admits that he cites Serizawa's research and that his work is related, but he refuses to budge on the potential dangers of flying so close to the sun.
We can't allow sentimentalism to interfere with the growth of scientific knowledge.
Destoroyah's emergence is a direct result of his heedless march of progress without sentimental or even legal roadblocks. Megumi Odaka's Miki Saigusa, a recurring psychic from the second Heisei film Godzilla vs. Biollante, presents a sympathy for Godzilla that both Miki and the audience have built up over the last several films. Her relationship with Junior, which was seemingly usurped from Ryoko Sano's Azusa Gojo in Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla from the previous film, and her respect for Godzilla drives the emotionality of the plot, as well as the thematic arc of the entire Heisei series. Megumi is an absolute joy in these films, and giving her such a prominent role throughout the whole series was absolutely the correct choice, even though they could have developed her more. They even brought her back for a short film in 2022, more on that later. Mickey also has a mirroring force, the G-Summit American Information Officer Meru Ozawa, played by Sayaka Osawa. With Mickey's psychic powers beginning to fade, an American-trained psychic was brought in to help her. But once again, the American perspective on Godzilla comes at odds with Mickey's sympathy for the monster. Meru agrees with Kenichi. Godzilla is a threat to the world and needs to be destroyed by any means necessary. Both Kenichi and Meru have their perspectives shifted by the end of the film, but Meru being in the field with Mickey and psychically connecting with Junior lets her see firsthand why Mickey cares about the two Godzillas. The last standout role is another returning character, the G-Force Commander, as of Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla. Colonel Takaki Aso, as played by Akira Nakao, represents the military perspective here. Nakao's stoic performance as the head of the organization tasked with handling Japan's greatest threat is so good that I think the only thing I have to do to defend my position here is to point out that after the Heisei series was over, they ended up hiring him for 3 more Godzilla films. Like, how much more clear does it need to be? Thematically though, the character's a bit more weak. His role in the story is not to carry themes, but to instead drive the plot forward. He asks the questions that get the characters to explain their positions, and then he makes a decision based on that to move the scene along. A very practical character, both in how he acts and in how the narrative uses him. Chapter 4. Strong effects, stronger emotions. And that narrative is quite tight. It has no breaks at all. After that thrilling intro that firmly plants the audience in their seats, the film wastes no time in introducing all these characters through some fun dialogue, as well as Destoroyah in crab form by way of a reference to the classic Oxygen Destroyer scene. Recreating that iconic scene with modern effects is just a really nice touch for this tribute to the franchise. Little moments like this and the general concept of the film being so linked to that first film really make this film feel a lot more like the 40th anniversary film than Godzilla vs. Space Godzilla. While G-Force attempts to figure out how to stop Godzilla from killing the world, the Destoroyah problem significantly worsens, leading to one of my favorite scenes in the film, the fight between the juvenile Destoroyah and the Japanese Self-Defense Force. By this point, Toho had long lost their partnership with the JSDF, thanks to Godzilla vs. Mothra. In that film, the JSDF attacks Mothra when she comes to save the Shobijin, because a giant monster was entering the city and destroying things, so of course they shot at it. The JSDF, like most militaries, have extremely fragile egos, and couldn't handle even that level of slightly critical representation, and thus cut ties. So here, in Godzilla vs. Destoroyah, they can show these JSDF guys just being fucking annihilated, alien style, by a swarm of Destoroyah. Then once that excitement is over, we also get a really sick alien singular style scene with Yukari in a car trying to escape a lone Destoroyah that is really determined to shove its extending mouth into her flesh. These scenes are a really effective way to show the growing threat of Destoroyah. It's almost worse than the giant kaiju form since there's just so many of them and you still have a hard time beating any individual specimen. In a group, their ability to strategize makes them unstoppable. Seeing the human cost of the kaiju rampage really ups the stakes because, like, those are humans, not buildings. A building might contain people, but it might not. It lets you off the hook of actually thinking about the destruction. Who cares? Some billionaire who just destroyed the entire economy with their asset bubble? Cities can be rebuilt. Humans can't. The scene is also reminiscent of many monster films that Ishiro Honda and others made for Toho during the Showa era. The non-giant kaiju films. Kaiju here meaning strange creature, while Dai Kaiju is what actually denotes a giant monster. Matango, H-Man, The Secret of the Telegion, and The Human Vapor all feature human-sized monsters with human-sized stakes. For a tribute to the history of the Toho monster film, it feels fitting to include a little bit of those smaller-scale monster attacks that Ishiro Honda liked to indulge in when Toho would let him step away from Godzilla. We then finally get to see the Super X3 in action with its completely unexplained cold-based weaponry. A brief fight scene leads to that extremely cool freezing effect where the Godzilla suit is transitioned into a version of the suit covered in an ice-like substance with some CGI and heavy amounts of liquid nitrogen to smooth it over. The liquid nitrogen was actually pretty damaging to the suit, as you might imagine, so these scenes were filmed last with the legs just completely removed. It looks really good though, I adore it. There's a couple effects in this film like this that just make me go, wow, every time. We have a nice conversation between Mickey and Meru that kind of goes nowhere, and I wish they had expanded upon it. It would be nice to get some more character out of the person who's been in almost all of these movies. What is she thinking about now that she's losing her powers? Meru says she'd love to lose her powers and become a normal girl. Mickey then just gives her a look at that statement, but then the scene is interrupted by Junior showing that he is, in fact, alive and nearly an adult now, so we don't really get much more out of it. It just feels like a missed opportunity, but we'll come back to that later. After a brief sentimental reunion between Junior and Mickey, we return to Odaiba where the Destoroyah are getting larger, but so is the military presence, all equipped with unexplained cold weaponry. Odaiba actually lobbied hard to get Godzilla to stomp through their district. A lot of municipalities have in the past, but Odaiba really needed this one. The district had undergone a large amount of redevelopment in preparation for the 1996 World City Expo, and Toho was excited to have the final confrontation between Godzilla and Destoroyah take place at the expo. Unfortunately for Odaiba, Tokyo's governor at the time, Yukio Aoshima, canceled the event last minute, calling it a waste of taxpayer money. This, happening during the fallout of the acid bubble pop, left the area in the lurch, as this artificial island with poor access to mainland Tokyo couldn't attract businesses to fill the space left behind by the expo. They saw Godzilla as their last shot to draw people in, and pressured Toho to keep the setting in Odaiba, even if it meant showing Destoroyah swarming their empty, unused buildings, and Yukari calling the place troubled. I don't know how well it worked, but the region did start to recover by the end of the decade, so maybe it did. When faced with their cold weaponry, which conveniently liquefies micro-oxygen, making it inert, the Destoroyah have a final trick up their sleeve, combining into the giant aggregate form. Upon seeing this, Dr. Ijuin realizes that the warnings of Serizawa have come to fruition. Despite his intentions and his best efforts, his lack of sentimentality in his search for progress has brought him right back to the Oxygen Destroyer. As he tells this to the general next to him, the general echoes that last word, giving the kaiju its name.
Destroyer?
It's a really nice diegetic way for the name to be introduced. But now that there's an Oxygen Destroyer in play, even if it's a monster instead of a bomb, Kenichi doesn't need Ijuin to make one for his plans anymore. Simply lure Godzilla and Destoroyah together and
let them fight.
And you already have an easy lure. Junior, who Godzilla seems to have been chasing this whole time. Mickey is of course extremely opposed to basically every aspect of this plan, but Meru agrees with it. Meru and Kenichi's younger, American-influenced practicality overpowers Mickey's sentimentality.
Don't be sentimental.
Funnily enough, when you think about it, this decision does end up saving the day, but just in an entirely unexpected way for all the characters. A real comedy of errors type situation, but I guess it all works out in the end. Their redirection sets up the fight between Destoroyah and Junior, Junior's first kaiju battle. Junior isn't the scraper that Godzilla is, but that doesn't stop Junior from saving Mickey and Meru in their helicopter. Even though the two of them put him in this situation, he will fight to the death to protect them. Junior, having been raised by humans directly and indirectly for most of his life, is a kinder, gentler soul than its adoptive parent. Godzilla, in contrast, was raised by nuclear energy haphazardly thrown around by a humanity that then hated and feared the monster they had created. Godzilla does not care about the lives of the humans. It just can't stand all these other monsters that keep appearing. But Godzilla does care for Junior, just out of pure instinct, and joins the fight just in time for Junior to actually save itself. Junior and Godzilla have a brief reunion before Destoroyah reveals its perfect form, now taller than even the supercharged Godzilla. Now, Tokyo has two problems, a melting down Godzilla and a mutated offspring of the Oxygen Destroyer. Luckily, the solution to the Destoroyah problem and the Godzilla problem is actually the same, cold, and the Super X3 is perfect for that and ready to roll out. Destoroyah's attack of the reuniting pair instantly shows just how much it's grown, as it picks up Junior, now a fraction of its size, and flies off. Its sadistic nature is also on display as it carries Junior away just to drop it on the now useless Expo complex. Seemingly dead, both Mickey and Godzilla take a moment to grieve the loss of the young monster. Mickey, now stern-faced, turns to the creature that killed Junior and says,
I have a feeling this is going to be Godzilla's last fight.
Then, one of my favorite parts of the fight happens, and Destoroyah drags Godzilla across Haneda Airport. Look at this behind-the-scenes clip of how they made this shot. It's so cool. Godzilla recovers, and both monsters prepare for battle, each radiating steam. What follows is one of the most brutal fights of the Heisei era. Godzilla is just too overflowing with power, though. After growing in strength by absorbing more radiation in each movie, and then absorbing the volcanic eruption at the start of this film, Godzilla is unstoppable.
See, even the Destroyer can do nothing against Godzilla's power.
Destoroyah tries another tactic of separating into several aggregates, which makes for a very fun fight between Godzilla and a bunch of smaller kaiju, a concept that would be revisited in Godzilla vs. Megaguirus. It doesn't actually cause that much trouble for Godzilla, but an attempt was made. Godzilla takes more time to mourn, seemingly attempting to breathe some life into the fallen Junior like Rodan had for him 2 movies ago, before being sneak attacked yet again. God, Destoroyah is such an asshole. I love it. The danger is no longer Destoroyah though, no matter how much it wants to be the danger. Godzilla is melting down, quite literally. His spines literally melt in another incredible effect. Like they just actually melted a wax model of the spines for that effect. It's so cool. Godzilla unleashes a full barrage of nuclear power on Destoroyah, just clearly showing how outmatched the creature is, before G-Force and their bevy of coal-based weaponry shoot it out of the sky. For the ultimate fight of Godzilla's life, Destoroyah kinda goes out like a chump. As Godzilla melts down, the Japanese military bears down upon it with all of their coldest weapons. Godzilla doesn't even fight back, as if it knows that it needs to be cooled down to prevent it from killing the planet that Junior loves. The sound effects of the missiles and beams fade out and are replaced with Akira Ifukube's beautiful Requiem, which we will talk about in full later. Then we have the single coolest effect in the film as Godzilla melts down to the skeleton and then nothing, reflecting the Oxygen Destroyer death scene in the first film. Honestly, the fact that most of this was done on a computer in 1995, the rest being done through wax models, is extremely impressive. All those particle effects really help disguise it, but still, damn, it's just so peak. Tokyo is now an irradiated wasteland, incapable of recovery. Then, the radiation levels lower. The characters wonder why, until the silhouette of Junior, now a full adult Godzilla, appears through the cloud of destruction. Junior roars triumphantly, ending the film. Junior's presence ended up saving them all. The credits roll over a highlight reel of the first Godzilla film and all 7 entries of the Heisei era, scored by Akira Ifukube's Symphonic Fantasia, a celebration of his storied career working on kaiju films for Toho. Chapter 5, Too Much for One Film to Handle. This film has a lot of highs. I just went through a ton of them for a long time, but it does have some lows as well. As I mentioned earlier, Miki does not get nearly the development she deserves, and she's the most developed character in the film. Yukari, Kenichi, and Dr. Ijuin are all effectively props to deliver exposition, theming, and plot developments, rather than actualized characters with any sort of simulated interiority. Meru, I'm pretty sure, only exists to force Miki to go along with the plan of redirecting Junior. I didn't even mention they brought back Sho Kuroki from Godzilla vs. Biollante, now played by the original actor's brother, Masahiro Takashima. And that's because he doesn't matter in the slightest. The other pilots of the Super X3 don't even have names, and yet they all get about as much screen time as any other character in the film. Screen time taken up entirely by saying action movie phrases or techno-babble. This is crazy to me because screenwriter Omori knows how to write compelling characters, and Omori and director Okawara have worked together to make characters compelling before, in Godzilla vs. Mothra. It's nothing crazy deep, but they are characters you can get invested in. Meanwhile, none of these characters here are particularly memorable. In fact, I bet you forgot about most of them completely until I explained them earlier. You almost certainly forgot their names at the very least. You probably only knew Miki, and it's not because you actually know anything about her as a character, it's just that she's in 6 of these dang films. Let's see, she's psychic, she's nice and empathetic, and she's uncomfortable with the way G-Force handles the Godzilla problem, but knows that she can do more to change that perspective from within G-Force than from without. And that's about all I could think to say of her. 6 films in, and they couldn't do more than that? It's so frustrating. Individual Godzilla films in the Heisei era have better or worse developed characters, but Miki never gets to have the character development juice, despite being the only character who gets to stay in these films the whole time. Or maybe because of that? It's possible that her basic characterization makes her more malleable for whatever kind of film you're making, but I still feel like they could have done more with her. For all the places Miki Saigusa has popped up in the wake of the Heisei films, from the Awaji Island Godzilla Park to the recent Gigan Rex short film featuring the adult Junior, to the fucking Dave the Diver DLC, Miki Saigusa, as much as I enjoy Megumi Odaku's performance, does not have anything inside her other than kindness and psychic powers. It feels like a waste of a fun character type that got 6 movies to develop. Just a shame. And speaking of wasted potential, I said the Destoroyah was the perfect final enemy for Godzilla to face down, but what did Destoroyah actually do? It fights the JSDF to great success, but is eventually contained. It fights the cold weaponry and has to combine to prevail. It fights Junior and almost wins, but ultimately loses, and has to become perfect form. And then it gets fucked up by burning Godzilla 3 separate times before being unceremoniously destroyed by G-Force. It's a bit anticlimactic. It makes a degree of sense when the real threat is Godzilla's dying heart, but that's because the filmmakers made it that way, right? I feel like there's definitely a better way of handling this showdown between Godzilla and the Oxygen Destroyer. There are definitely worse ways, though. At least the current presentation disguises its discarding of Destoroyah with the immense weight of Godzilla's meltdown. It makes for a very thrilling conclusion. You almost don't miss Destoroyah, but God, he really does get tossed out of the film. An alternate version of the film was shot and, correctly in my opinion, scrapped, that featured the fight continuing as Godzilla melted down, and the JSDF pelted both of them with their cold weaponry, which really brings the fact that they both can be hit by cold weapons full circle. I think that's kind of cool in the way that works. It was removed because the Godzilla death scene was supposed to be the climax and needed more room to breathe. And honestly, I agree with that. The filmmakers are correct here, but I think there's room for both. You can have Godzilla killing Destoroyah in this knockdown, drag-out fight while being pelted with cold weapons, and then do the full meltdown once Destoroyah is dead and buried. But that's not what they did. It leaves me wondering if it was an issue of them having already recorded that first ending, and to craft the second ending, they just had to work with what they had, especially considering the budget cuts the effects teams had been put under for this final outing. But I don't know, it kind of seems to me, in my admittedly less informed position, like the pieces are all there to make something. I just don't get it. Why spend so much time and effort, 22 people over 40 days, bringing Destoroyah to life, and then establishing it in the film if you're just going to give up on it when the climax comes around? Madness. Insanity. And finally, the film may be in conversation with the 1954 original, but it doesn't seem to have much to say about it. It doesn't bring nothing to the table, but it seems like invoking Godzilla in 1954 would mean that you think you have something that can match the energy. Instead, the film kind of gestures to it and goes, look how far we've come, without stopping to explore any of that. Emiko is the most interesting aspect of this, as her haunted life of survivor's guilt adds an interesting, horrifying twist to the ending of Godzilla, which kind of is what the entire point of Godzilla -1 is. That's a compelling movie right there. You had a whole compelling movie right there. The scenes between her and her grandchildren are the most weighty and thematic conversations in the film, and I can't help but feel that maybe a larger role for her in the film might have made those themes more rich. Instead, the question of nuclear power and weaponry, despite obviously being very present throughout the film, feels very shallow. It feels like all this kind of comes down to how much they are trying to do in this one film. There's just not enough space in this hour and 45 minutes for Destoroyah to feel satisfying, and Godzilla to have a proper send-off, and to properly examine the 1954 film, and to develop all the characters. The ambition of the film outstretches its ability to satisfyingly do it all. Chapter 6. Sentimentalism versus Pragmatism. There is another theme to the film that I find does come through to a satisfying degree, though. Several times in the movie, the word sentimental appears, in opposition to practicality and progress.
We can't allow sentimentalism to interfere with the growth of scientific knowledge.
Don't be sentimental.
Perhaps more than exploring the fears of nuclear power or the separation in perspective on the nuclear bomb between America and Japan, or generational gaps, Godzilla vs. Destoroyah explores the eternal struggle of sentimentality and idealism versus pragmatism and progress, and it lands firmly on the side of sentiment. As we looked at earlier, the film sees progress without sentiment as dangerous. Science without historical awareness just leads to repeating mistakes, but with even more powerful technology. As for pragmatism, while Kenichi and Meru's decision eventually works out for the best, the immediate consequence is the near death and then full death of Junior, all right before the eyes of the two people who care about Junior the most, Mickey and Godzilla. Pragmatism without sentiment is cruel and leads to unnecessary death, while sentiment without pragmatism leads to death and destruction as well. If they hadn't brought Junior with them, who knows what would have happened. It's a perspective I tend to agree with, although I can't help but note that this is coming from the Godzilla franchise, the linchpin of Toho's media empire. Godzilla is not just a series of some of my favorite films of all time, it is a brand. A brand built on now 70 years of nostalgia. Godzilla the art cannot be looked at separately from Godzilla the brand. They are the same entity. A Godzilla film coming to me and saying, please don't give up on sentiment, does to a certain degree feel like it's coming to me saying, please don't give up on giving us money. When the film also deals so much in reminding you that the 1954 film exists and celebrating the 7-film run of the Heisei era, I don't know, it's just a little strange, you know? Still, I otherwise like this theme of the film. It's just like a little alarm bell in the back of my head going off about it, like I am being sold to, but that's every Godzilla film, right? That's almost every film, honestly. Chapter 7, One Last Ride. But that's not the only way that the film harkens back to the past. Godzilla vs. Destoroyah is the final Godzilla film to include work by those who worked on the original Godzilla film. This includes Momoko Kochi as Emiko, of course, but also involves longtime Godzilla producer Tomoyuki Tanaka as executive producer, and the brilliant composer for so many Toho Kaiju films, Akira Ifukube, back for one final soundtrack. I've already espoused Momoko's wonderful performance, which brings so much of the weight of this film. 3 years after the film's release, Momoko Kochi would pass away from colon cancer at 66. Tomoyuki Tanaka was absolutely essential to Godzilla's very existence, as an individual film and as a franchise. His insight to bring together Ishiro Honda, Eiji Tsuburaya, and Akira Ifukube was absolutely essential to Kaiju Eiga as we know it. There would be no Godzilla without Tanaka at Toho as the producer. Tanaka would pass away only 2 years after the release of this film from a cerebral infarction. Finally, Akira Ifukube is as much a creator of Godzilla as Tanaka, Honda, Tsuburaya, or any other crew member on the original film. Not only did Ifukube craft the iconic soundtrack for dozens of kaiju films, including the unforgettable Godzilla March, he also created the first Godzilla roar, upon which all other Godzilla roars are based. Ifukube is undoubtedly a musical genius, and while other Godzilla composers are also quite talented and have made tracks that stick in the mind as well, there is nothing that says kaiju film quite like an Ifukube track. Even to this day, modern Godzilla films don't just use the compositions that Ifukube wrote so many years ago, they use the exact recordings that he made. There's just nothing else like it. If there is one thing that absolutely 100% works in this film, it is the music. It is sheer perfection. Ifukube's work in Godzilla vs. Destoroyah brings together a lot of themes, melodies, and leitmotifs that have popped up in his work over the years and brings them to one powerful finale. Even the final Requiem for Godzilla is a full medley of various pieces Ifukube had made for Toho over his long and illustrious career. It's not just a Requiem for Godzilla, it's a Requiem for Ifukube. A Requiem for Momoko and Tanaka, a Requiem for Honda and Tsuburaya, and everyone else who worked on Godzilla, and a Requiem for an era of Toho that was now not only over, but passing into history.
In a way, it was as if I was composing the theme for my own death. When Godzilla was born, a phase of my life began. Now, Godzilla is gone, and that phase is over. It was very emotional.
This was Akira Ifukube's final film score, and he would pass away 11 years after its premiere. Godzilla vs. Destoroyah being in conversation with the original film and hosting the final works in the franchise of the alumni of the first Godzilla turns the death of Godzilla, which was never truly dying forever, into a tribute to all the people who 41 years ago had worked together to make one of the most influential movies of all time. They may have been passing on one by one, but their legacy would live on forever through the King of the Monsters. Chapter 8. Did it work? Toho made sure to pair the death of Godzilla with an appropriately sized media blitz. One of the taglines of the film was the surprisingly direct, "Godzilla dies." Koichi Kawakita announced on the eve of the film's release that he was retiring as special effects director at Toho to join Bandai. Toho announced that they were going to pave over the big pool where Godzilla water scenes have been filmed since the 60s to put up a parking lot. Shortly after release, Toho held an actual funeral for the kaiju and erected a statue in its honor where fans would leave offerings. Toho wanted the world to think Godzilla was dead as a doornail, and that the only way to see him off was to go see their newest film and buy all the merch for it. But did they? Yeah, they did. Godzilla vs. Destoroyah was the highest grossing Godzilla film since the high point of Godzilla vs. Mothra, and came damn close to matching it. The Japanese populace was flocking to the theaters to watch this film. Americans would have to make do with bootlegs until 1999, despite an English dub existing for 2 years by that point. American companies just did not give a shit about Japanese Godzilla films, but I digress. Actually, let me digress a little bit more, because I've heard people call this dub bad, and as a dub connoisseur, I gotta say, it's fine. Like, there's no real stand-up performances or anything, but there's nothing particularly bad either. Some of the performances I'd even let slide into the good category. There's some awkward deliveries here and there as the dub actors try to match the lip flaps of the people on screen, but that's really as bad as it gets. Dubs get so much worse than this, trust me. As far as merch sales go, exact numbers are hard to come by for a humble YouTuber, but I did find that Toho capped 1996 at almost $1 billion in total revenue, which seems pretty good to me, I don't know. It makes sense to me that the film's merch would be successful though. I mean, Godzilla vs. Destoroyah is a pretty toyetic film. Destoroyah doesn't just mean one new toy you have to buy, you gotta get a toy for each of those different forms. Bandai only had aggregate and perfect form, but flying form, junior form, and crawl form are also potential merch opportunities. Godzilla itself now has a burning form to buy, and hey, don't forget Junior, there's another one to buy. Bandai also made a Meltdown Godzilla, giving us yet another Godzilla form to purchase. And who wouldn't want memorabilia of the death of a beloved character? Think of the value proposition there. All of those polybag Death of Superman issues really went up in value, right? While critical reception acknowledged the flaws and didn't exactly help its standing in regards to the Heisei-era Gamera films, the opinion did still trend positive, an improvement from the much more mixed perspective on Godzilla vs. Space Godzilla. The film even won some awards at the Japan Academy Awards, a special award for sound effects, best editing for Chizuko Osada, and best sound for Kazuo Miyauchi. Godzilla vs. Destoroyah set up the franchise for a relaxing retirement for the last few years of the century, coasting on toy sales while the new Hollywood Godzilla carried on the legacy. How's that going, by the way? Chapter 9, A Lasting Legacy. In 1996, when the American Godzilla was originally supposed to release, director Roland Emmerich, known for mediocre yet somehow popular disaster films, and producer Dean Devlin, known for working with Roland Emmerich for a few years, were brought on board to save the film after former director Jan de Bont, known for a truly ridiculous number of blockbusters, left because TriStar Pictures refused to approve his budget of $100 to $120 million. $125 to $150 million, and 2 years of rebuilding the film from the screenplay up later, they finally had their movie. And it kind of flopped. Like, it made enough money to be considered a success, but it severely underperformed domestically, only saved by international successes. The film was critically panned, Toho alumni hated it, and most importantly for a nostalgia brand like Godzilla, the fans largely hated it. To the point that the American fan base coined the term Gino, Godzilla in name only, while Toho, to this day, refers to it as Zilla, Godzilla without the god. Modern fans have been giving the film a bit of a re-evaluation, Star Wars prequel style, but at the time, this film was absolute brand poison. Brief digression since this video is not about Godzilla 1998, but while the contrarian in me appreciates the attempt to rehabilitate this film, I just can't get on board. Time has not been kind to these effects, and really the film commits the greatest crime a film can possibly commit in my eyes. It's just boring. I probably won't ever make a video about it since there's just nothing to say about it as far as I'm concerned. I guess consider this my official take in lieu of a video, and if you do enjoy it, whether because of just plain nostalgia or otherwise, more power to you. No matter how you feel though, the fact of the matter is that Godzilla 1998's release forced Toho to bring back Godzilla early as a form of damage control for their lucrative toy brand. Thus, Godzilla's death lasted a grand total of 3 years until the release of Godzilla 2000 in 1999. This actually led to a common misconception that Junior is the Millennium Godzilla, but unfortunately no, the Millennium films each just have their own continuity, with usually only the 1954 film being retained. Despite the most memorable aspect of the film, Godzilla's death, being almost instantly negated, technically true even within the film itself, Godzilla vs. Destoroyah definitely made an impact. Burning Godzilla has become essentially Godzilla's Super Saiyan form, now synonymous with Godzilla being at the height of its power instead of at the end of its life. 2019's Godzilla King of the Monsters, Pipeworks Software Kaiju Brawler successor, Gigabash, and the most recent Fest G short film featuring the Millennium Godzilla all have their own take on the burning Godzilla design, showing just how embedded it is into the Godzilla canon. Destoroyah, thanks to its excellent design and concept, its position as the final film in the Heisei era, and several very cool scenes, has overcome its lackluster showing in the film to become a fan favorite, with appearances across the broader franchise like all those Pipeworks games, Gigabash 2 of course, many arcs of the Bandai Toei-based show Godzilla Island, and a ton of comics. Destoroyah is adored by the fan base from basically this one appearance, a testament to all the work that was put into it by the cast and crew. The movie itself has also become a fan favorite. The film consistently ranks high in fan popularity polls and retrospective fan reviews like Toho Kingdom's 2005 Post-Final Wars review.
With an elegant style, a powerful plot, brilliant effects, and believable acting, this entry is definitely a notch above favorites from all three timelines, and its impact on the series is challenged by only a handful of competitors.
This kind of effusive praise is common amongst fan sites, to the point that fan forums have developed a bit of a knee-jerk reaction in the opposite direction towards the film. The film has a similar passionate fan base in its home country, some of which seem to have control over the decision-making of Toho. This year, a new Godzilla store opened up in Shibuya, and to honor the 30-year anniversary of Godzilla vs. Destoroyah, the shop was adorned with a giant burning Godzilla statue out front. In 2022, Toho released a short film titled Godzilla vs. Gigan Rex, a 3D animated film where a Heisei-like Godzilla faces off against very strange redesigns of Gigan. The film opens with narration by Megumi Odaka, implying that the film features the return of Miki Saigusa and Jr. And as I mentioned earlier, at the most recent Fest G, the short film Fest G2 Shinjuku Burning gave us a Millennium Burning Godzilla. It has never been a better time to be a fan of Godzilla vs. Destoroyah. Regardless of your thoughts on the quality of the film, whether you find the flaws too much to ignore or, like me, the high points just overpower them for you, it's impossible to deny Godzilla vs. Destoroyah's place as one of the most iconic Godzilla films. In the 30 years since its release, its place in Godzilla history has only solidified stronger. After all, it's the film where Godzilla dies, at least for a little while. But of course, Godzilla always lives on despite everything, and so will Godzilla vs. Destoroyah. Thanks for watching. Hey there, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. I've got a lot more for you if you want them. Just hit that subscribe button and ring the bell to get notifications. I'd also appreciate if you left me a like and a comment and maybe shared the video around with your friends. You can also follow me on all the usual social media sites. Just check out my website in the description below for more info. My videos are funded by my patrons, Ko-fi subscribers, and YouTube members, whose names you'll see scrolling by in these credits here. For just $1 a month, you too could find yourself here, trapped in my end screen for all eternity, among other benefits. In particular, I'd like to thank Jeremy Coatney, Frog Prince Michael, Fleakill, Haru Hayes, the Almighty Ferret Lord, Fire Mizumi, Beastman, Bryn, and Beelzis. A big thanks to all my patrons and to my little community as a whole. Remember to be kind to yourselves, be kind to others, and have a wonderful whatever time it is for you. Bye-bye!